Super excited to see you guys all on our path to profit. And we are looking forward to really diving deeper on building an agile supply chain. So, welcome back to everyone who's been supporting us and coming in on this calls live, as well as for everyone. Thank you for watching our replays, sending us comments, and letting us know that this is really brings you value and that we're giving you some great ideas and implementing into your business. Thank you really very much for also supporting us and showing up every Thursday, third Thursday of the month at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, where we are starting off our path to profit. And the topic of our conversations today is how to build an agile supply chain. So I'm really excited to see you guys all here. Now that we're starting off, really, I would love to take off and really talk about the where we are going to kind of cover today and where did we start. If you remember, if you guys have joined us on our roundtable at the beginning of the month, which we host every first Tuesday of the month at 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. For those who have joined us earlier, we've talked about a difference between a push versus pull supply chain. And today, this is really a continuation of that conversation where we are going to shift, though, from and shift gears a little bit from actually why it was important to do it to how it actually done. Last session in the roundtable, we used it really more of a diagnostic problem, where today we're going to talk about why the push models are really creating the pressure. And we have also talked about why the inventory really locking in the cash and why speed is limiting your ability to respond. Well, today we're going to build that system. And you guys are going to walk away with a blueprint and as well as ideas of what you guys can do for your 90-day pilot to be able to implement some of this work. One of the things I want us to kind of start off because really to talk about the understanding what is the difference between push and pull, because understanding between those two things actually often is a little bit confused. You know, operationally, an agile supply chain, well, inside the real business, real fashion and manufacturing business, often is mistaken with a push supply chain that we're trying to implement agility on top of. It's not the same thing, and we're going to talk a little bit about why. That is where really things get to be very different. And this is where a lot of the times it's not working for others when they're trying to create this agility because they are really trying to layer it on top of something that is not meant to be agile. And I want to set really the expectation clearly that this is not a theoretical topic or conversation today. This is not a high level of conversation. This is really an executive working session. By the end of today, you should have a draft blueprint of what the agile supply chain looks like inside of your business and a very clear prioritized set of pilots that you can run in the next 90 days. But first, I'd love to let me introduce myself, especially for the ones, for those who do not, this is the first time that are joining us, and please welcome. I'm really happy that you have joined us. I hope that we see you guys on our next Path to Profit as well as the Roundtable series. But for those who don't know me, my name is Evgenia Alexandrovna Yushkova, or simply Yay, and I'm a fashion and retail business strategist and a founder of Yay Designs. This is a boutique consulting agency where we're a small team, but all of us are senior level executives who come from the industry with wealth of knowledge. We have 79 years of experience combined between our team. We work with fashion, retail, and consumer brands that are growing, but starting to feel the pressure behind the scene. Revenue is up, but margins are inconsistent. Inventory is harder to control, and teams are constantly reacting instead of operating with structure. And what most companies don't realize that it's not really the product problem. It often is really the system behind the product that needs to be addressed. And at EA Designs, we've redesigned the operating systems of the business, aligning merchandising, pricing, supply chain, and really internal process into a structure that actually supports profitable scaling. We focus on where the money is being lost: hidden margin leaks, inefficient assortment, and supply chain that cannot keep up with the demand. And we fix the root cause, not just treating the symptoms. Because the growth without a system does not scale. It gets very expensive. And you tend to lose a lot on the EBITDA side. And today we're going to really break down how to fix some of those things that are so critical. Let's start really by defining what does agile actually means. And agile is really doesn't mean that it's an agile because it's not really just related to the speed alone. And agile does not really mean that it's nearshoring manufacturing. And agile is not just a producing faster. It really, agility is really, it's a structural change to your supply chain or to your operations, of how you think about it, of how you're actually structuring your suppliers, and how you're structuring your flow, and how you're structuring your lead times, and how you're structuring your assortment in order for you to be agile. Very critical to understand that. It is your ability to really deploy capital progressively. It also helps you to adjust production without really disruption. It shifts suppliers without breaking operations. Replenishing really based on demand signals, and protect margins while you're doing it. If your system cannot do those things, you're really not agile. You're just reacting faster. And this is where we get a lot of confusion, even with the clients that we get. Often they're coming in and say, well, we're already agile. And when we start to look at all of their systems and operations and supply chain, we realize that they are doing an incredible job on reacting fast to the symptoms and keep treating the symptoms, but they're really not set up for agility. They're really not agile. And this is where we help them to do and actually get to the path of agility. And before we build anything new, we need to understand what is your really actually operating today, right? How does your operations look like today? How does your supply chain looks like today? I want you to really mentally walk through your current value chain, because where does your process actually begin? Does it starts with trend forecast, or maybe a design calendar, or a merchandising plan, or maybe a fabric commitment? And more importantly, where does the capital gets committed? Because that's the real starting point. Wherever you're committing your capital, that's when you need to start thinking about it. So that's the beginning of your process that you need to figure out, how do we now turn that into agile? In the most businesses, the push model looks very similar to this, where we think about forecast, then we go into designing, then we are committing to fabrics, materials, product. Then we start to produce, and then we hope that demand matches. And we tend to produce in this model more bulk production ahead of time of the season, and very seldom we can go back within the season to actually place another reorder and chase that demand. And the issue is really not because it's missing visibility. The issue really is the commitment timing. Most companies commit either too early or too broadly or with too little validation. I'm really curious to know, where in your process do you feel like you're committing too early? Please drop your comments. I'd love to hear it. Is it fabric? Is it in the production? Is it in capacity potentially? Where are you actually committing really early on in the season, or pre-season? Because that's where the commitments that are actually placed is where you starting to tie in your cash. And that's when it becomes the most opportunity for us to start to streamlining. Because anytime we tie in our cash for a long period of time, we're actually hurting our business because we're not able to quickly reinvest that cash into things that are matters in order for us to escalate and grow that business or in that season. Because whether that is really, that's where your risk is really concentrated if you think about it. And that is the first place your agile model needs to change. Now let's shift into really a design of that process itself. And thinking about, an agile system does not eliminating planning. It changes what drives execution if you think about it. Instead of committing everything up front, you're creating a decision gates. You are able to react quicker. You're able to actually see your demand and be able to chase that demand within the season and not wait till the next season when you actually can bring in another bulk order and be able to fulfill that demand. Well, if that demand dies for the following season. So thinking about what are the triggers that are triggering some of those decisions that we need to make at that point we start to commit. Whether we potentially could have committed to capacity, but we're actually not placing orders in agile supply chain closer to the time when we actually need that product to be on the floor or get to the stores. And because of our agile manufacturing or agile supply chain that we're creating, we're able, because in the smaller runs that we need to commit to, we're actually able to chase and potentially turn our inventory within one season 2.5 times, 3 times. Again, all depends on the product. Of course, if you are in particular products like shoes, potentially fine jewelry, it's much more difficult to have smaller production runs and work it on an agile supply chain. But when we talk about apparel, accessories, even some of the other type of consumer goods products, we have clients who are doing wearable patches, for example. We have clients who are working on edible products as well. Those are all have an ability to actually be set up in a quick turn, small runs production in the modular manufacturing capabilities, factories to be able to support this vision. Demand really should trigger capital deployment and not just the forecast alone. If you think about it, right? You launch lighter, you validate faster with this type of a system, and you are also replenishing based on a signal. You scale based on the proof. An in demand triggered system, we're actually able to respond to the demand within that season and be able to turn on inventory quicker. It's no longer is based on assumptions based on the past sales history, which obviously that is absolutely important. And we still have to make sure that we include that in part of our planning. But we are able to adjust our open to buys. We're able to adjust on our commitments and placing orders very quickly within that season based on this demand that you have. So if you're starting the season well, you're able to increase in a frequency and also increase the amount of units you're going to bring in. But let's say 3 weeks later, something happens to the season and it tanks. Well, you're not sitting on thousands of units of inventory. What you actually are sitting on in this case is just few hundred, if not less, units that you are bringing in that you can still deploy and slow down your next order so that you do not end up having and tying up your cash and then potentially even marking down all this product later on. So thinking about your assortment in 3 layers is a really good way to look at it. One layer we're thinking about is where is our testing layers, right? Low commitment. Layer 2, where is our validation, which is the early signal product. And layer 3 is where our actual scale, the replenishment engine. In the scale and the replenishment engine, we have a easier time and to be able to commit upfront more units because we already know that this product is potentially our evergreen product. We have less risk for this product not to move throughout the season. We have more history on this product to understand where this product is actually going to sell and how this product is going to sell. And if it has a longer shelf life, we again allowing ourselves to be able to not have such a high risk. But also, we can create a repetitive replenishment program based on understanding of what happens usually within our season with that particular evergreen product. But where we often put ourselves in high risk is when we use the push system for test and validation. So test is really going to be more of your trend items that you're bringing in specifically for the season, or you're testing new product categories, and committing to those with big upfront commitments is sometimes a business suicide. Or maybe we're using certain particular products to understand the early signals. Well, in that case, we definitely want to be able to come in and actually turn that product quickly and correspond to the demand if it does take off, so that we don't miss the season and have to wait for the next season to bring in the next inventory. And the mistake most companies really make is that they treat all three layers the same. I want to ask a question to the audience, and thank you so much for sending your comments. They're really great. Um, Mary, thank you. You mentioned that you need to be more disciplined in your open to buy. Yes, makes total sense. And and a lot of times when we say, open to buy is really not for a rigid, should be as rigid where you set it in at the very beginning of your forecasting season and it doesn't change. Actually, if you structure it correctly, you should be able to adjust your open to buys and actually look based on what happens in your demand within beginning of the month of your season or in the mid month of your season, and you can actually adjust it as you go. Keeping it fluid is really important. So thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. But I do want to ask a question. Do you currently have the structured replenishment model? Or are you still treating most buys as a one-time commitment or potentially one-time commitment with an option to do one chase within a season? I'd love to hear what you guys actually are experiencing yourself, because across majority of our clients that we receive, if we look at their ability of actually turn that inventory multiple times within a season, are almost non-existent. Majority of them are committed to a one-time commitment, and yes, if they're lucky, they are able to replenish it, but the replenishment comes towards the end of the season because their lead times are so long. And that's where it becomes extremely difficult to manage and ensure that you do not have lots of leftover stock later on that you'll have to liquidate or mark down, which then depletes your working margin. This is where most businesses honestly get stuck. They try to add replenishment on top of the push system instead of redesigning the system all around it. We get into one of the most critical levers in this particular conversation that brings up, it's the lead time. Lead time is not just how long it takes you to actually get the product from the time you approved it to the time you actually get it into your warehouse and manufacturing, but lead time is actually really impacts on your cash commitment and how much you're actually tying up your cash too early in the season, that you're not don't have working capital to be able to react or put it into marketing, as an example, which will actually help you drive more sales. You cannot build an agile supply chain on a slow system. It doesn't matter how good your data is, it's impossible. If your lead times are 90 days or 60 days, well, within a season that only lasts 4 months, there's no way, even if you want to, can actually be able to replenish or turn that inventory quicker because you are committed. You have to commit up front, right? You have to commit to all these units, hoping that the demand will actually be the same and show the same trajectory as previous months or previous seasons. And with today's environment, we already got ourselves burned so many times that the market is so unstable right now. We don't know what happened. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. People are not, the shoppers don't have as much money as they used to have today. And constantly new wars are starting up, which people are reserving from their ability to shop. It all applies and affects your business. So the only way, if those things are outside of your control, what's inside of your control is to optimize what you have on the operational side and in your manufacturing side so that you could be resilient to all these unpredictable changes that happen throughout the season. Lead time is really not just an operational problem, it becomes really a financial problem. The longer your lead times, the earlier you commit your cash. The longer it is tied up and less flexible you are. Let's really deconstruct the lead time a little bit further. Design and development is really the first thing that impacts your lead time. Sampling loops is another main factor that potentially could make your lead time longer. Approvals, fabric sourcing, and all of those are lead times that affecting you going to market. While the pre-production approval samples, the production lab dip approvals, the fabric production approvals, the top of the production approvals and production itself with logistics is the effect of your lead time for production lead time altogether. And if you put the development lead time together with the production lead time, in an average business within the fashion industry right now, it's still 9 months out from the time you're going to develop, and that's in the best case scenario, and from the time you started to develop and design to the time when you're actually able to ship it to the customer. It's too long. Within that 9 months, so much more is actually going to change. We are living right now in a rapid environment of change. So we need to make sure that how do we shorten the lead time on the development side so we can go faster to market? And most importantly, how do we shorten the lead time on the production side so that we are able to react to the changes and actually bring the product to the demand? And here's really the truth where it sits. Most of your delays are often internal, not an external factor. We always blame the manufacturers setting up the tone of the lead times. But often it really sits in a moment where we do not fully understand the full process that it takes to design, develop, or create or produce this particular product. We're not actually looking at it from a perspective of where we can save time. Big brands, they look at fabric programming. They look at raw good materials reservations ahead of time. They look at gray goods, finished product where they potentially have that in stock. By just doing that as an example, and by way that they can be able to program their designs into those fabrications, they de-risking themselves. At the same time, they're not tying up a cash for all the sum that takes to finish the actual product. They don't have finished products so that they're able to, if that style is not going to work, they can take that fabric and create different styles for the next season. So there's always a way out. They don't have to discontinue this fabric or liquidate this fabric most of the times if it's done right. But by just doing those commitments up front, as an example, if the understanding where the process is, they're able to shave off sometimes 2 to 4 weeks within their production lead time altogether. Or understanding at what point you might want to actually do piece dyeing versus garment dyeing? Where does it make sense? When does it make sense to sublimate your fabric prints versus during the actual printing, where you actually have to have the molds and have to actually print on fabric runs and big meals, right? So thinking about those aspects and asking those questions with the manufacturer, those are really internal problems. We just don't ask enough questions. If you had to reduce your lead time by 30%, where would you start? Love to hear from you guys. Please drop your comments. Love to understand where you would start if you would have to do this with your business. The biggest win we often see with our clients is when we start to reducing sample loops, when we aligning teams earlier, where we're starting to bring in, for example, our production team during our design explorations, during our planning of the season of what we actually want to bring in, what fabrics we want to use. We bring in production teams, we bring in marketing teams at those time frames. Where in a traditional environment, you start to bring those already after everything's designed, and you're passing it on to them so that they can start thinking about then, well, now how are we going to produce this and how are we going to do this? Right? Pre-approving materials ahead of time is very critical. Not waiting until you're actually ready to place the order. Now we start in our approval process. Creating parallel workflows instead of sequential ones. And now with the AI, the ability that we're actually able to manage a multiple workflows or multiple processes of that's happening in parallel is impeccable. But in order for you to implement that into your business, you have to first understand your process and understand where you can bring in those AI or AI agents that can help you do those things. There's so much buzz about it right now, and so you try to grasp everything, but in reality, not everything will apply to your business. You have to start with your process. You have to understand which part of your process impacts the most to your long lead times, and figure out how we able to then crunch that and then eliminate that or improve that. The speed is really not a factory problem. It's the system design problem. And if we don't understand the factory's process, it is very difficult for us to partner with them to be able to shorten some of those lead times, to be able to figure out how we can do things more modularly. So this is where you often hear me talk about, do not treat your vendors or manufacturers as just a vendor or supplier. Treat them as your partner. If you can understand their process and they can understand your problems in terms of how you're trying to get quicker to market and how you're trying to eliminate buying a bulk bikes or de-risk buys or de-risking yourself by tying up full production cash up front, right? This is where you start to come together and come up with the processes that works best for you and for them. It becomes a win-win situation. And that's what we're looking for. This is where agility either works or completely breaks. The MOQ is not just a supplier constraint. It really is a system constraint. A lot of the times we don't even understand fully what drives the MOQs that are being imposed on us by the supplier because we're not asking enough questions. Our designers are not asking enough questions. Our product development, sometimes teams don't even ask enough questions to understand exactly which part of the process of the product cycle production and how long it actually takes for each piece. For one client, we actually were able to shave 3 weeks by just understanding where the factory is buying their yarn and shifting that closer to them so they don't have to wait for that fabric to be shipped, for that yarn to be shipped from China. We found that yarn and sourced it in much closer region to them, and they were able to shave 3 weeks alone from their lead time. And not only that, they were also able to reduce the MOQ because instead of dyeing the fabric to piece dyeing, where we dyed all these dye lots, where they now had to deplete that fabric into the MOQs, We switched the model altogether to where now we're doing everything prepared for garment dye, and then we're just garment dyeing this product. Yes, we had to make a little adjustments on our design side. Yes, we had to adjust some of our blocks, but it saved us from committing to 1,200 units to 800 units per style per color to now where we could do it as little as 60. I mean, those are the things we have to consider and understand. And we would never understand this if we would not ask enough questions to what actually impacts this MOQ that you were talking about, and creatively trying to think about how we are able to resolve it. Often enough, the MOQ is tied in with the fabric. It commitments. It also sometimes has to do with your capacity allocation. And sometimes it has to do with the way you are actually segmenting your suppliers, because some suppliers are set up only for volume and big manufacturing. So if that's the suppliers only the suppliers that you have in your toolbox, well, this is the time when we need to start thinking about diversification and how do we diversify the product itself. I mean, diversify our supply chain and our supplier list, right? So that we have the ones that can do agile and can do smaller runs. And then when we have the signals showing that this style is proven and we could see that now we can actually turn this into a margin driver style, that's when we push it and turn it over into the big commitment factories. You do not solve MOQ with just negotiation. You solve it with the structure and building the programs. This is super important to understand. Because if we're just constantly pounding our suppliers for giving us low MOQs and trying to negotiate, and plus on top of it, we all want to have a better price and keep squeezing them, we're not creating a win-win situation here. But if we understand their process, we understand their hurdles and what actually is tied into decision making of this MOQ, then we can decide about how to program it, how to potentially have earlier commitments to gray goods and have those in stock. We can actually partner up and create structure that allows them to lower MOQs and still be in a win-win situation with you. To operate agile, what we really need to really think about is to recap fabric strategy, stock versus custom, right? Thinking about fabric programming, how many times we have brands who are using these beautiful, luscious fabrics and they literally have one or two styles in them and then they move on to the next ones. You have to think about, can I use this particular fabric or this particular gray good? And maybe with different types of finishes, I can actually have 5 or 10 styles in it. And I can potentially use that same fabric and gray good season over season. There's so many ways we can finish the fabric and finish the gray goods that will look completely different without actually changing the material itself. Capacity allocation is important to understand core versus flexible. Where your core is where you want to and have to reserve your capacity up front, and you want to make sure that you're never going to run out of stock, and the factory has the capacity reserved for you, and you can project that because it's a safer projection. This is where you have lower risk. But on anything that's new and anything that you're testing, this is where we need to understand what is our flexibility with the supplier in terms of our capacity. Can we reserve a capacity specifically for this testing, but can they be flexible in case we don't have as much or we don't meet? And then what if we do meet or and actually over exceed what we projected on the demand? What kind of a capacity flexibility will they give us then? Having those conversation early on and not when you're actually already in the middle of a season is a key. And the supplier segmentation is incredibly important to align it with your assortment segmentation. Last few profit path to profit series is we've talked about your assortment and how to position your assortment and how to segment your assortment. And the segmentation of assortment really then aligns with the supplier segmentation and understanding that this is the tier of suppliers who have modular manufacture, who could do agile, we're going to dedicate to our testings, to the things that we want to turn quickly, to the things that we want to be able to react quicker, while we can reserve our bulk big suppliers for things that are core and things that we want to actually drive margin on. So those are the important things to start understanding about your own business that are so critical. You should not really treat all suppliers the same. You need core partners for stability. You need flexible partners for responsiveness. And you need specialized partners for capability. If your suppliers are forcing you to make a decision to place larger orders, then you're really not operating strategically. You have to understand your needs first and then design your supplier network to fit your needs, not the other way around. I'd love to ask you guys a question. Are your suppliers enabling flexibility? Or they're really dictating what your model should be? If they're really dictating and you are actually creating your supply chain around what your suppliers' capabilities, what they can do, then that's why I'm going to pose the question for you to start thinking about what is it that you need for your business to be more successful, so that you do have more working capital throughout the season, so that you don't tie up your capital in cash, and then try to retrofit and redesign your supply chain to fit that. That's the key. And the cheapest suppliers is often the most expensive systems, because they will force you to overcommitment. If you squeeze in them for every dime to actually make the margin, of course they're going to ask you to commit to more units. Of course they're going to ask you to commit to a more finished product and reserving more capacity. But that's a risk on you. That's the risk you taking at the end of the day if that product doesn't sell, or if you're going to be sitting on that inventory for more than 60 days or for more than 30 days, or especially for more than 90 days. So those are the things that you have to consider and work with your suppliers network as well as with your supply chain to be sure that you are the one who dictates of what you actually need, and find the network that can actually support your need, not the other way around. This is where the most agile transformation honestly fails, is going to be governors. Not because your supply chain, but it's really because of how we are approaching it. Because how are we actually asking those questions ahead of times, and who is actually responsible for constantly optimizing this particular process? You cannot run an agile system with a traditional KPIs. We often put that on ourselves by tying our teams and their goals towards the forecasted accuracy or gross margin percent or units sold or sell-throughs. I mean, just ask your own self. I mean, what are your KPIs for your team today? But instead of that, if we're able to shift the forecast accuracy to KPI, for example, to demand responsiveness, to gross margin percent, to a margin that realized over time, instead of looking at the gross margin percent, to actually look at your working margin after the markdowns, after the liquidations, after taking into account that you also tied up the cash for over 90 days and what you were not able to invest. If you put all of that in together, your margin is actually going to be much lower, believe me or not, than your gross margin that you're potentially holding your team responsible for. Instead of units, you want them to look at the cash efficiency. And instead of your sell-throughs KPIs, why not actually why not actually put a KPI for them for the inventory turns and increasing that inventory turns? Your goal for apparel business should be minimum 3. But with a traditional supply chain, it's almost nearly impossible to do. And this doesn't apply just to retailers. This applies to even manufacturing brands because you are supporting retailers, which you still have that inventory that you're also turning, and you potentially might be even selling your own direct to consumer. All that takes into account. If you want agility, you really have to start tracking. You want to track inventory turns. You want to track your cash conversion cycles. You want to start tracking your replenishment speed. You want to start tracking your sell-through velocity. And if you are selling direct to consumer, you also want to look at your open to buy flexibility. Working with your planning team, creating open to buys, not again at the beginning of the season or the beginning of the year and then get stuck into it, but really working it as a fluid model that could be adjusted depending on what's happening within the season, depending what's happening within that previous month. And what you measure is what your team really needs to optimize. And once you start turning that and really allowing your teams to reframe and rethink how they actually approach your business, that's when you start to win. That's when you start to see where you, as you grow, you actually are eliminating a lot of this extra stress points because you are optimizing as you go. It's continuous improvement. You often hear me talk about continuous improvement. It cannot stop. It has to happen all the time. And you have to train your team on how to continuously improve within the season or within the process or as they're going through this. You don't transform your entire business at once. That's another critical point. You start with really controlled pilots. I want for you to think about those three things. If you would have to do this today, which category is the best for testing your pool system that's currently is? And where can you reduce commitment risks? And which suppliers can support flexibility? If you start asking those three questions, it's going to start giving you an idea of where first you might want to start looking into optimizing instead of trying to optimizing everything. Some of the examples for the pilots you can think of it is we want to optimize a replenishment model for core strategy. Or maybe we want to reduce the MOQ test. Or maybe we want to fast development cycle and decrease our lead times. Or maybe we want to actually try out a dual sourcing strategy. I will not know today which particular one you need to focus on. You have to sit down with your team, with your business, with where you are right now, where your main stress points are. Ask the 5 whys of why that's happening to get to the bottom of the root cause and find a way of where you can dedicate the next 90 days to actually implement this pilot and optimize it. You have to also make sure that you're putting some prioritization filtration. Because when you are going to sit down with, and highly recommend to do this as a Kaizen with your team, you're going to come out of there with a list mile long of things that are potentially could be beneficial to your business if we could optimize. But you can't do them all at once. So this is where we want to prioritize it based on what is the most impact going to do that on your business and to your end consumer. And those are the ones you want to start first. Your pilot really should reduce your risk, improve your speed, free up the cash, and it should be measurable with 90 days. So when you're creating and thinking of pilot, ask yourself and prioritize it in that order. Does it do all of those things? And if it doesn't impact those things as much, then you could leave that for the next time. But you want to focus on the ones that will impact those things. If you had to pick one pilot to run starting next month, what would it be? I'd love to hear that. And so please drop your comments or get back to me later on. I'd love to hear it because all of us are different at different stages of our business. And it'd be interesting to see if there is a pattern to or trend that we are seeing of actually the things that people want to optimize today in this particular moment. And as always, if you drop those comments, it shows us that what we are talking about is valuable, that you guys are thinking about your business, that this is giving you ideas of how to improve your business. and create a stronger foundation for growth and expansion. But now that we are coming to the top of our hour, I really love us to talk about and kind of just recap everything we have talked about today and how we're going to address that going forward. What we did today really is we've thought about not just about the trends that are important, are creating more agility within your business or have an agile supply chain, but we really talked about the system itself. Because the reality, most companies don't lose margin because of the product. They lose margin because of how they operating, right? And how they actually approaching it. Push models lock cash. Remember that. Slow systems kill flexibility. Rigid supply chain create risk. Where agile systems do the complete opposite. They allow you to move faster, commit smarter, protect margins, and scale with control. And the companies that win over the next 2 to 3 years will be the ones that have the best designed process, not the best product design. The ones that actually have the best optimized system. If this session made you think how your question and really question yourself how your business operates, then that was exactly the point that we were trying to do. So I'm really happy and excited to know that this is working. Love to hear from you if that is exactly what's happening with you guys right now. And if you're serious about building this inside your organization, I really highly recommend to start with one pilot and build from there. And if you're setting up really the thinking and thinking about that you want to implement this pilot and that this sounds familiar, this pain points that we just talked about sounds familiar, things feels heavier than it should, the decisions take longer, and your margins aren't really reflecting the effort, that's exactly why we structured this series for you guys to join every month on different topics to help you grow your business. We always start every month with the roundtable where we break down the operational gaps where they actually happen across the teams, design teams, with merchandising teams, product development, and operations. We touch them all in this series. And how misalignment, approval loops, and sampling inefficiencies are quietly impacting the speed and the margin and ability for you to scale. In today's session, for example, we dive deeper into how actually redesign your supply chain, shifting from push-based model to more of a demand-triggered replenishment model, engineering lead times, and structuring your suppliers and MOQs for flexibility. In the next month, in May, we're going to be talking about how operational gaps actually destroy your profit, and fixing some of those process chaos will help us to be able to actually be more profitable at the bottom line. And this is why we do this. This is what matters the most. So in the roundtable, that's going to be on the May 5th at 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can register on our LinkedIn page at Yay Designs. We will be talking about that particular gaps and define what those gaps are. While in the Path to Profit, which is held on May 21st at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, we're going to talk about the end-to-end process optimization. How do we define the gaps that we've defined in the roundtable? How do we actually can optimize them? I really hope you guys will join. I cannot wait to see you guys all back. And please, again, register on our company page at yaydesigns.com. And in those sessions, we're really going to focus on how to map your full process from idea to customer, where time, cost, and margins are actually leaking, and how to redesign your system to improve speed, reduce rework, and protect profitability. It will not be just a conversation. It's really going to be a progression to help you identify those gaps, redesign the system, and then rebuild it for profitability. And if you're serious about scaling without losing control of your operations, start with this session that makes the most sense to you. If you follow us on YouTube, all the replays are there. We've been doing this almost, this is our second year that we've been doing our Path to Profit, and a third year that we've been doing our executive roundtables. There is a lot of content out there on different subjects and topics. It doesn't matter where you are in your business, I guarantee you can find them there. Start there, start implementing, and register to watch our next months, so that even if you cannot make it live, if you registered, we are going to send you replays. So you will be on our list to reach out. And I'd love to hear what part of your process feel the most inefficient right now. Drop a comment, share, like our content so we know that we are bringing value. And if you have a particular topic that you want us to talk about with you for the next sessions that coming in, let us know. We would love to cover it as well. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and I will see you next month.